Raghav, Neelam, Ayan, and the mysterious Jogi Keshav Nath, four lives intertwined in a quiet Texas neighborhood, until one night turned trust into terror, innocence into tragedy, and a harmless spiritual visit into a deadly nightmare. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. In the summer of 2016, a quiet residential area in the outskirts of Austin, Texas, appeared calm and ordinary. The streets were clean, the houses were similar in design, and families followed a predictable daily routine. Among them lived an Indian family that had slowly blended into American life while still holding onto their traditions. Raghav Malhotra had moved to the United States almost a decade earlier for work. He was disciplined, respected by colleagues, and known as a man who trusted logic more than superstition. His job in a tech company kept him busy, but he always returned home early enough to spend time with his family. His wife, Neelam Malhotra, experienced the opposite life. Living far from her relatives in India, she often felt isolated. She followed rituals, believed in signs, and searched for comfort in spirituality. Over time, her loneliness grew quietly. Their son, Ayan Malhotra, was the center of their world. He was energetic, curious, and loved exploring nature. He had a habit of collecting small objects from the backyard and asking endless questions about insects and animals. The house often echoed with his movements, filling the space with life. The Malhotra home stood at the corner of the street, close to a small patch of trees. Neighbors liked the location because it felt peaceful and safe. Crime was almost non-existent, and children often played freely without fear. The Malhotras trusted their surroundings completely. Doors were sometimes left unlocked, and windows were kept open during warm nights. There was no sense of danger, only routine and comfort. In the weeks before the incident, subtle changes began to appear. Neelam started feeling uneasy without understanding why. She suffered from recurring dreams that left her restless. The house, which once felt warm, began to feel heavy to her. She cleaned more often and lit incense frequently, hoping to remove the strange discomfort. Raghav dismissed these feelings as stress and work pressure. Life continued as usual, with no visible signs of what was approaching. Ayan remained cheerful. School had just ended for summer vacation, and he spent most of his time indoors watching documentaries or outside playing alone. He had recently developed an interest in reptiles after watching a nature program. This interest went unnoticed as something harmless. The family had no idea that this innocent curiosity would later connect to a terrifying reality. On one particular evening, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The air felt still, and even the usual sounds of insects seemed distant. Inside the Malhotra house, everything appeared normal. No one sensed that the safety they trusted was already broken. Something unseen had entered their lives, slowly moving toward a tragedy that would soon shock not only the family, but the entire community. The next morning began like any other, but it carried a strange stillness that no one noticed at first. Sunlight entered the Malhotra house through half-closed curtains, spreading softly across the hallway. Neelam woke up later than usual, feeling unusually tired. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place where a child usually moved around early during summer vacation. She assumed Ayan was still asleep and continued with her routine, unaware that time was already slipping away. Minutes passed and the silence grew heavier. Neelam felt an unexplained pressure in her chest. She walked toward Ayan's room, expecting to find him wrapped in his blanket. The door was slightly open. As she stepped closer, a strange smell filled the air, something unfamiliar and sharp. The room felt cold despite the warm weather outside. Ayan was lying still on his bed, his body positioned unnaturally. There was no movement, no sound, no sign of sleep. Panic spread rapidly. Emergency services arrived soon after, followed by local police. The house was suddenly crowded with strangers wearing gloves and carrying equipment. Ayan was declared dead at the scene. The moment shattered the quiet image of the neighborhood. News traveled fast, and neighbors gathered outside, watching silently. No one could understand how something like this could happen in such a safe place. Inside the room, officers began carefully observing every detail. Small puncture marks were visible on Ayan's arm and neck. At first glance, they looked like insect bites, but their pattern raised suspicion. Near the bed, investigators noticed a thin, dry layer of shed skin. It was later identified as belonging to a snake. The discovery changed the direction of the case immediately. Fear replaced confusion. The idea that a dangerous snake had entered the house seemed impossible. The area was not known for such wildlife. The windows were inspected, and one of them showed signs of forced opening. The screen was cut cleanly, not torn by an animal. This suggested human involvement. The room showed no signs of struggle, which made the situation even more disturbing. Ion appeared to have been attacked while asleep. Medical examiners took the body for further testing. The family was taken away for questioning, still in shock and unable to process the loss. Raghav arrived from work to a scene he could never forget. His belief in logic and safety collapsed instantly. Nothing about the situation made sense. A secure home, a peaceful area, and yet a child was dead. As night fell, police sealed the house. Forensic teams continued working under bright lights. The presence of snake venom was soon confirmed. This ruled out natural causes. It was no accident. The conclusion was terrifying. The snake had not entered on its own. Someone had placed it there deliberately. What initially appeared to be a tragic and rare incident was now turning into a calculated crime. The death of a child had become the beginning of a dark investigation that would reveal something far more sinister than anyone in the neighborhood could imagine. As the investigation moved forward, fear began to spread beyond the Malhotra house and into the entire neighborhood. The idea that a poisonous snake had been used as a weapon disturbed even experienced officers. Wildlife experts were called to examine the evidence collected from the bedroom. The shed skin was analyzed, and the venom report from the medical examination provided a clear result. The child had been exposed to a highly dangerous species, one not commonly found in that part of Texas. Search teams combed the nearby wooded area, backyards, drains, and empty plots. Traps were set, and residents were advised to stay indoors. Days passed, but no snake was found. This absence raised serious concerns. If the snake had entered naturally, it would likely still be somewhere close. The fact that it vanished without a trace suggested that it had been brought in and taken out deliberately. Investigators began reviewing environmental data. The temperature, humidity, and surrounding ecosystem did not support the presence of such a reptile. Local wildlife records showed no recent sightings. Even experienced animal control officers admitted that the situation did not match a natural encounter. The case was no longer about a wild animal wandering into a home. It was about planning and control. Attention returned to the Malhotra house. Forensic teams re-examined the bedroom in detail. The bed position, the bite marks, and the lack of disturbance showed precision. The child had not screamed or tried to escape. This indicated that the attack happened quickly and silently. Traces of a mild chemical substance were found on the window frame and curtains. It was later identified as a sedative commonly used to calm animals. This discovery confirmed what investigators feared. Someone had used knowledge, patience, and intent. The snake had been handled, transporting, and released with purpose. This was not an impulsive act. It was planned carefully, possibly days or weeks in advance. As news media began covering the story, public pressure increased. Parents in the area kept their children indoors. Schools sent warnings. Rumors spread rapidly, some claiming a cult was involved, others suggesting illegal animal trafficking. The lack of answers created panic. Police started building a profile of the person responsible. This individual was likely familiar with snakes, comfortable handling them, and confident enough to enter a family home unnoticed. They also needed a reason strong enough to commit such a horrifying act. Random violence seemed unlikely. The method was too specific, too cruel. Investigators expanded their search to include recent visitors to the house, service workers, and anyone connected to the family. Travel records, phone data, and online activity were reviewed. Slowly, a pattern began to form. The crime was not just about killing, it was about sending a message. What began as a case that shocked a single family was now revealing signs of something deeply disturbing. The fear of a hidden predator, not in the wild, but among people, changed the tone of the investigation. The truth was moving closer, and it was far more frightening than a snake in the dark. As investigators traced the timeline of events leading up to the child's death, attention slowly shifted toward the days before the incident. Every visitor, delivery, and unusual activity was reviewed. During this process, one detail stood out clearly. About a week before the tragedy, a man unfamiliar to the neighborhood had entered the Malhotra house. He was identified as Keshav Nath, a Jogi known within certain Indian communities across the United States. Keshav Nath was not a registered religious leader or certified healer. He operated in private spaces, often invited into homes through personal recommendations. His reputation was built on fear rather than faith. People believed he could remove bad energy, curses, and unseen threats. He dressed traditionally, carried small cloth bags, and avoided public places. His presence in the Malhotra home initially seemed harmless, but now it demanded deeper attention. Records showed that Neelam had contacted him after weeks of mental discomfort and recurring nightmares. Living far from family support had made her emotionally vulnerable. Keshav Nath presented himself as someone who could cleanse negative forces. He spent over an hour inside the house, moving from room to room, performing quiet rituals. Nothing appeared aggressive or alarming at the time. Raghav was not present during this visit, and this detail later became important. Neighbors remembered seeing the Jogi leave calmly, carrying the same bag he had brought. No one suspected anything unusual. At that point, the visit was dismissed as a cultural practice, something common in immigrant households. However, investigators noticed inconsistencies. Keshav Nath had requested access to the child's bedroom during the ritual, claiming it was the most affected area. This request, once forgotten, now raised serious concern. Police began researching Keshav Nath's background. His name appeared in online forums where people accused him of manipulation and fraud. Several former followers claimed he used fear to control them. Some mentioned his unusual interest in animals, especially snakes. He was rumored to believe reptiles carried spiritual power and punishment. Further digging revealed a critical connection. Months earlier, Raghav Malhotra had posted warnings about Keshav Nath in a local Indian community group, exposing him as a scam. These posts had gained attention and caused financial loss to the Jogi. The posts were later deleted, but digital records remained. Investigators now saw a possible motive forming. Travel data showed that Keshav Nath had moved between states frequently, often avoiding long stays. He had no fixed address. His movements before and after the visit aligned closely with the timeline of the crime. When police attempted to contact him, they found that his phone number was no longer active. What once appeared to be a simple spiritual visit now felt like a calculated step in a larger plan. The Jogi's arrival at the Malhotra house was no longer seen as coincidence. It was the moment when belief was exploited, trust was abused, and a deadly intention quietly entered the home, hidden behind rituals and silence. As the focus tightened around Keshav Nath, investigators began to understand that the crime was driven by something deeper than superstition. It was not an act of madness or random cruelty. It was fueled by anger that had grown silently over time. The online posts written by Raghav Malhotra months earlier were recovered in full. They detailed how Keshav Nath used fear to demand money, how his rituals had no effect, and how he targeted emotionally weak families. These posts had spread quickly within Indian community groups across several states. Because of those warnings, many people stopped inviting the Jogi into their homes. Donations dropped. Invitations ended. His influence weakened. For a man whose power depended entirely on belief and control, this loss was unbearable. Investigators believed that Keshav Nath did not forget the humiliation. He studied the family quietly, waiting for the right moment to strike back. The visit to the Malhotra house was no longer seen as spiritual help. It was surveillance. During that time, he learned the layout of the house, the sleeping habits of the child, and the weaknesses in security. The backyard trees, the unlocked windows, and the quiet routine all became part of his plan. He chose a method that would terrify, confuse, and destroy without leaving obvious fingerprints. The use of a snake was intentional. It symbolized punishment in his twisted belief system. Investigators learned that Keshav Nath had previously been involved in illegal animal handling. Old complaints mentioned reptiles being kept briefly during rituals. Though no evidence had ever been strong enough to charge him, the pattern now felt clear. He knew how to control snakes, how to transport them safely, and how to release them in a confined space. The timing of the attack also carried meaning. It occurred during a period when the family felt emotionally unsettled. Nullum's fear had unknowingly opened the door for him. The Jogi relied on belief, not force, to gain access. This manipulation was as much a weapon as the snake itself. Digital records showed that Kushevnath had searched for venomous reptiles weeks before the incident. He had visited locations known for illegal animal trade. Surveillance footage from a gas station near the Malhotra home showed his vehicle passing through late at night, days after his ritual visit. Each piece of evidence strengthened the same conclusion. This was revenge carefully hidden behind tradition. The most disturbing realization came when investigators understood that the child was not the original target. The act was meant to punish the father. The loss was designed to cause lifelong pain. This understanding changed the emotional weight of the case for everyone involved. It was no longer only about murder. It was about cruelty shaped by wounded pride. By now, the image of a harmless spiritual figure had completely collapsed. Kushevnath was no healer. He was a man who turned belief into a weapon and planned suffering with patience. The investigation had crossed a point of no return. The truth was becoming unavoidable, and it was far darker than anyone had expected. The investigation reached a critical stage when physical evidence finally began to connect every theory into a single terrifying reality. Forensic teams returned to the Malhotra house with renewed focus, treating it not as a crime scene frozen in grief, but as a carefully constructed trap. Every surface, corner, and object was tested again. This time, the search was slower and more precise. What they found shifted the case permanently. Microscopic traces on the bedroom window frame revealed residues of a chemical compound not used in household products. Laboratory analysis confirmed it was a mild sedative commonly used by animal handlers to reduce aggression and movement in reptiles. The substance explained why there had been no signs of chaos in the room. The snake had been calm, controlled, and deliberately placed. This discovery ruled out every remaining possibility of accident. Further analysis of the bed sheets and floor revealed faint-scale impressions that matched the shed skin found earlier. The positioning showed that the snake had been released close to the sleeping child and had not moved randomly. It followed a predictable pattern, guided by instinct but enabled by human planning. Investigators concluded that the timing was calculated to ensure the child was deeply asleep. The strongest breakthrough came from outside the house. A neighbor's security camera footage was recovered after days of review. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Then, during a late-night time window, a figure was seen entering the Malhotra backyard. The person wore loose clothing and carried a soft, hanging bag. The movement was calm and confident, not rushed. Minutes later, the same figure exited without the bag appearing full anymore. Image enhancement clarified the outline of the individual's face and posture. It matched Kushevnath. His walk, body shape, and clothing style aligned with previous recordings from other locations. The footage placed him at the scene after midnight, hours before the child's death. This was the moment investigators had been waiting for. Digital data added another layer. Location tracking from nearby cell towers showed his phone moving through the area that night before going silent. Though the device was later discarded, the data could not be erased. Travel records showed he left the state the following morning, using cash and avoiding surveillance-heavy locations. With this evidence, authorities expanded the scope of the investigation. They reviewed unsolved cases involving exotic animals and sudden deaths. 2 incidents from different states surfaced. Both involved individuals who had challenged or exposed Kushevnath. Both deaths had been ruled accidental at the time. The patterns now appeared unmistakable. What once seemed like an isolated tragedy was now part of a larger, hidden history. Kushevnath was no longer a suspect in a single crime. He was emerging as a predator who used belief, fear, and rare methods to harm without immediate detection. By the end of this phase, investigators were no longer asking who committed the crime. They were asking how many times he had done it before and how close he was to doing it again. The hunt for Kashivnath became urgent, driven not just by justice for one child, but by the fear of what would happen if he disappeared forever. The search for Kashivnath intensified as law enforcement agencies across multiple states were alerted. His name, face, and movement patterns were circulated quietly, without public announcement, to prevent him from vanishing again. Investigators believed he was experienced in avoiding attention and had survived for years by staying one step ahead. This time, however, the evidence against him was too strong to ignore. Financial records revealed unusual activity. Cash withdrawals were made in small amounts across different locations, a method often used to avoid tracking. Bus tickets purchased under false names showed a clear attempt to move quickly without leaving a trail. His patterns suggested preparation for escape rather than innocence. Authorities concluded that he knew the investigation was closing in. The breakthrough came when border security flagged a man matching his description attempting to leave the country using forged identification. He appeared calm, carrying minimal belongings, and avoided eye contact. When detained, his possessions were examined carefully. Inside one of his cloth bags, officers found traces of animal sedatives and snake handling equipment. Though no animal was present, the tools told their own story. Once taken into custody, Kashivnath was connected to a larger network of illegal practices. Investigators discovered he had contacts linked to underground animal trade operations. These connections explained how he obtained rare and dangerous reptiles without detection. His spiritual image had served as a perfect cover, allowing him to move freely and earn trust while engaging in criminal activity. As records were reviewed, 2 previously closed cases were reopened. Both involved sudden deaths that had been ruled as accidents. In one case, a man had died from a rare animal-related injury inside his home. In another, a woman was found dead after an unexplained incident involving wildlife. At the time, no connection was made. Now, investigators found that both victims had publicly challenged Kashivnath or attempted to expose his fraud. The pattern was chilling. He targeted those who threatened his authority and reputation. His methods were unusual but effective, creating confusion and delaying justice. Each crime was designed to appear unnatural, making investigators question chance rather than intent. This strategy allowed him to operate for years without suspicion. For the Malhotra case, the evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, forensic data, digital tracking, and motive all pointed in one direction. Prosecutors described the crime as calculated, symbolic, and deliberately cruel. The arrest brought temporary relief, but it did not erase the damage done. As news of his capture spread, fear turned into anger within the communities that once trusted him. Families came forward with stories of manipulation and intimidation. What had been hidden behind faith was now fully exposed. The case was no longer about one man alone. It became a lesson about how power can be abused when belief replaces reason. And for the investigators, one truth remained painfully clear. Kashivnath had not just taken a life. He had weaponized trust itself. The trial concluded after months of detailed examination, leaving a deep mark on everyone who followed the case. The court reviewed every piece of evidence with care. The footage, forensic reports, digital trails, and recovered tools formed a complete picture. There was no room left for doubt. The crime was declared intentional, planned, and driven by revenge. Kashivnath was sentenced to life imprisonment, ensuring he would never walk freely among people again. The judgment brought a sense of closure to the legal process, but it did not bring peace. For the Malhotra family, the loss remained permanent. Raghav and Neelam left Texas quietly within weeks of the verdict. They sold the house without ever stepping inside again. The memories tied to those walls were too heavy to carry forward. They moved to another state, choosing isolation over familiarity. Their lives continued, but the silence left behind by their child followed them everywhere. The house stood empty for years. New buyers avoided it once they learned its history. Locals believed the place carried sorrow, not spirits, but human cruelty. The once cheerful corner of the neighborhood became a reminder of how quickly safety can collapse. Children were no longer allowed to play freely outside. Doors stayed locked. Trust had changed shape. The case gained attention across the country. Documentaries, reports, and discussions focused not only on the crime, but on the method. Experts warned about blind belief and the dangers of allowing unverified figures into private spaces. Communities began holding awareness programs, encouraging people to question, verify, and protect themselves emotionally as well as physically. Investigators who worked the case later admitted that it changed how they viewed crime. The absence of traditional weapons made the act more terrifying. The killer had used patience, belief, and fear instead of force. This realization pushed law enforcement agencies to revise how they evaluate unusual deaths and cultural practices exploited for harm. Keshav Nath disappeared from public attention after his sentencing. No remorse was recorded. No explanations were offered. His silence left many questions unanswered, but the evidence spoke loudly enough. His power ended the moment truth replaced belief. Years later, the case continued to be referenced as an example of hidden danger. It proved that evil does not always appear violent or loud. Sometimes it arrives calmly, dressed in tradition, asking for trust. The death of a child revealed a reality many preferred not to see. The story remained a warning. Safety is not only about locked doors and cameras, it is about awareness. The Malhotra case showed how fragile normal life can be when trust is misplaced. A single act of belief opened a path for destruction, and a single crime exposed a long-hidden threat. In the end, justice was served, but innocence was lost, and the memory of one child became the reason many others were protected.